Picture this: an abandoned school, its corridors echoing only with the ghost of its once bustling life. This is where our story unwinds, with Sam, a somewhat bold yet always skeptical YouTuber, known for his ghost hunting exploits. With Halloween just around the corner, Sam decided that the deserted Welden High would be the perfect setting for his next chilling episode. The school had been mysteriously closed a decade ago, after a series of unexplained events made headlines. Since then, the doors had remained sealed until tonight. Armed with nothing but his camera and a hefty dose of skepticism, Sam stepped into the dilapidated building as the last light of day retreated. His flashlight pierced the darkness, sweeping across graffiti-tagged lockers and shattered windows. "Here we are, folks," Sam announced into his camera, trying to mask his growing unease with a tone of enthusiasm. Welden High, a place where echoes of the past supposedly still haunt its empty halls. Initially, his exploration yielded little more than eerie silence and the unsettling creak of his own footsteps. He narrated each step and sound, hoping to capture anything that would thrill his viewers. However, as minutes turned to hours, the thrill gave way to disappointment. Despite his efforts, the school seemed nothing more than an abandoned shell. But as the sky outside darkened to a deeper shade of black, Sam's fortunes began to change. Venturing into the old gym, he felt a noticeable drop in temperature. A shiver ran down his spine as he half-joked to his camera about the school's failing heating system. His laughter echoed hollowly in the cold air. Determined to make the most of his visit, Sam set up his ghost hunting gear, a digital recorder, and an EMF meter. He began asking questions into the still air. "Is anyone here with us? Can you give us a sign?" Silence was his only answer. Just as he was about to pack up, a soft thud echoed from the dark corners of the gym. Whirling around, Sam caught sight of a basketball slowly rolling to a stop at the center of the floor. "Okay, who's there?" Sam challenged, his voice echoing off the gym walls. No response came. The silence was thick and unnerving. Cautiously, he approached the ball, the camera's light bobbing with each step. As his hand touched the cold leather of the basketball, a chilling burst of children's laughter filled the gym. It was light and airy, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence he had encountered so far. Panic clawed at Sam's chest. His mind raced as he scanned the shadowy bleachers, half expecting to see a spectator from the beyond. The laughter continued, echoing around him, as if mocking his fear. Without thinking, he turned and ran, his camera forgotten in the rush of fear. He didn't stop until he was back outside, gasping for breath in the safety of the night air. Looking back at the imposing structure of Welden High, Sam felt a mix of relief and dread. The dark, empty windows of the school stared back at him, as if hiding secrets in their depths. The laughter had stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Heart still pounding, Sam knew one thing for certain: his days of ghost hunting were over. What had he heard? The playful echoes of a time long past, or something far more sinister? Sam drove away, the weight of the unanswered questions heavy in his mind.
That tingling? That's the fear running through your veins. If you love the thrill and don't want to miss any of our scary stories, hit the subscribe button.
It's unsettling how ordinary moments can turn into nightmares. This was precisely the case for Claire, who recently moved into a quaint, albeit slightly run-down, Victorian house in the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. The house, draped in Spanish moss and surrounded by aged oaks, had a charming, if eerie, aesthetic perfect for someone like Claire, a freelance writer with a penchant for the Gothic. Claire was drawn to the house's history and its previous owners, a fact that she frequently shared with her readers. But history, as she would soon discover, can be more than just stories bound in books or captured in weathered photographs. It can breathe, whisper, and sometimes refuse to be forgotten. The first few nights were uneventful. Claire spent her days exploring each room, documenting her findings, and writing by the flicker of candlelight when the mood struck her. However, as the novelty of the new house waned, Claire began noticing odd occurrences that she couldn't easily explain. Doors would creak open despite no draft, and the soft patter of footsteps would echo through the halls when she was certain she was alone. Initially, Claire chalked it up to the house settling or her imagination getting the better of her. It wasn't until one quiet evening, while Claire was deep in writing, that she couldn't ignore the peculiarities any longer. Her office was set up in what used to be the parlor, a spacious room with large windows and an antique chandelier that gently swayed without any breeze to justify its movement. That evening, the air grew inexplicably cold, and Claire felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She tried to focus on her work, attributing the feeling to the creepiness of the house and her overactive imagination. But then, the candle beside her flickered violently, as if caught in a sudden wind, and a low, indistinct whisper filled the room. The words were muffled, as if spoken through a veil of time and decay. Claire froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice a mix of fear and defiance. No answer came, only the soft creak of the house settling, or so she hoped. Trying to shake off the fear, Claire decided to investigate. She left her office, her steps hesitant as she moved through the dimly lit hallway, guided only by the soft glow of her candle. As she passed the dining room, Claire noticed the silhouette of someone sitting at the head of the table. The figure was motionless, and though details were obscured by darkness and her flickering candle, there was an undeniable presence. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The figure was dressed in what appeared to be a faded military uniform, a common attire for a gentleman of a bygone era. Heart racing, Claire approached slowly, the floorboards groaning under her weight. The figure remained still, almost as if it were a statue. "Hello," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand towards the figure. As her hand neared, the figure slowly turned its head toward her, its features blurred and indistinct. Claire gasped and stepped back, her mind racing with fear. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The chair was empty, as though no one had been there at all. Claire stood frozen, the cold air enveloping her like a shroud. She wanted to run, to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. Gathering her courage, Claire hurried back to her office, locking the door behind her. She leaned against it, her heart pounding in her ears. The candlelight flickered eerily, casting long shadows that seemed to dance around her. Claire knew she wasn't alone. The house held secrets, ones that weren't content to remain hidden. Over the following days, Claire attempted to uncover the history of the house and its previous inhabitants. She learned of a former owner, a Civil War officer, who had died under mysterious circumstances right in the home. His presence, it seemed, lingered still, tied to the house he once loved and perhaps to the unfinished business he left behind. Claire continued to experience disturbances, whispers, shadows flitting past the corner of her eye, even the soft sound of someone sighing in the empty rooms. Despite her fear, Claire felt a strange compulsion to stay, to understand the story of the house and perhaps help the restless spirit find peace. This eerie cohabitation became Claire's new normal. She wrote about her experiences, her articles tinged with the authentic chill of someone who lived alongside a ghost. And while she never felt truly alone again, she learned to find a certain comfort in the whispers of the past that filled her home, a reminder that history, no matter how dark, always yearns to be remembered. Ever felt like the night has eyes? That's what Greg started to believe after moving into his downtown apartment. The building, old and full of character, stood in stark contrast to the modern skyscrapers around it. Greg, a young software developer, chose this place for its charm and its affordable rent, not knowing it came with an unadvertised feature of view into the uncanny. His first few weeks were spent unpacking, setting up his home office, and getting used to the urban noises that filtered through his fourth-floor windows. But then, things began to feel off during the nights. It started with the feeling of being watched. Greg would often glance up from his computer to scan the room, half expecting to find someone staring back at him, but there was never anyone there. One night, around midnight, as Greg was burning the midnight oil on a project, the sensation became overwhelming. His apartment, usually a cocoon from the bustling city below, felt invaded by a silent observer. Unable to shake the feeling, Greg stood up and approached the window to look out into the night. The city was lit in patches by street lamps and neon, but one particular shadow across the street caught his eye. In the building directly opposite his, Greg noticed a figure standing in a window. It was completely still, silhouetted against the dim light of an unseen room. He tried to dismiss it as just a curious neighbor, but something about the stillness of the figure seemed unnatural. Night after night it was there, always in the same window, always motionless, just watching. Driven by a mix of fear and intrigue, Greg decided to investigate. The next day he ventured across the street and into the building, which turned out to be an old, barely used office space currently under renovation. He made his way to the room corresponding to the window where he'd seen the figure. The door creaked loudly as he pushed it open, revealing a room thick with dust and filled with old furniture covered in tarps. No one was there, no sign of any recent presence. The only thing out of place was a small, old-fashioned watch lying on the windowsill. Picking it up, Greg noticed it was stopped at exactly 12. Chills ran down his spine as he realized this was the exact time he always saw the figure. Returning to his apartment, Greg felt uneasy. He decided to set up a camera to record the window throughout the night. If someone was watching him, he'd have proof. But what the camera captured was far more unsettling than a voyeur. That night, as Greg reviewed the footage, he saw the figure appear in the window at precisely midnight, not from the sides, but fading into view as if materializing out of thin air. It remained there, unmoving, until dawn, then faded away just as mysteriously. The footage was undeniable. Greg watched it over and over, each time feeling the room grow colder. The watch, he now realized, was not just lost property, it was a relic, tied to the figure somehow. Was it the spirit of someone bound to that spot, watching the time or waiting for something or someone at midnight? Greg's nights became restless. The figure was always there, watching, as if waiting for him to understand some silent message. After weeks of sleepless nights and endless research into the building's history, Greg uncovered a tragic story decades ago. A watchmaker had worked in that very room, obsessively perfecting his craft, until he died of a heart attack, alone and unnoticed. His time stopped forever at midnight. Feeling a mix of sympathy and dread, Greg knew what he had to do. He returned to the room, the old watch in his pocket. As midnight approached, he laid the watch back on the windowsill, winding it gently before setting the hands to move past 12. As the minute hand ticked forward, the air in the room shifted. The shadowy figure appeared once more, but this time there was a change, a nod, almost imperceptible, before it faded away, not to be seen again. Greg left the building feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Back in his apartment, the sensation of being watched was gone. The nights were quiet again, the shadow no longer in the window across the street. Whatever message or purpose had bound the spirit to that place, Greg had fulfilled it. Time, finally, had moved on for the Midnight Watcher. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.